It was a bright, sunny afternoon in the city park. The air was warm, and the trees gently swayed in the breeze. People were out enjoying the weather, some jogging, others sitting on benches, and a few walking their dogs. Among the crowd, a biker named Jake swaggered into the park. He was rough around the edges, with tattoos covering his arms, and a worn leather jacket that made him look even more intimidating. He had a cocky smirk on his face, his sunglasses hiding the glint in his eyes. Jake loved showing off, and he loved pranks. They made him feel powerful, like he could control the attention of anyone around. As Jake walked through the park, his eyes scanned the area for his next target. His gaze fell on a small dog, happily playing near a bench. The dog was wagging its tail, darting back and forth in the grass, clearly enjoying the day. The dog's owner was sitting on the bench, engrossed in a phone call. She was so distracted that she didn't notice Jake watching her dog. Jake's smirk widened. He saw an opportunity to have a little fun. Bending down, he made sure no one was looking directly at him. With a sudden movement, he kicked the small dog hard. The dog yelped, startled by the pain, and immediately ran away, scared and confused. The owner, still on the phone, didn't even notice her dog's distress. Jake chuckled to himself, thinking it was just a harmless prank. The dog had run off, and the crowd around seemed to have no reaction. It was as if no one cared. He felt a sense of satisfaction, his cocky attitude growing as he heard a few quiet gasps from people around him. They were shocked but too afraid to say anything. Jake loved the attention, even if it was negative. It made him feel alive. He turned away from the scene, still smiling, expecting to just walk away like he always did after one of his jokes. But then from behind him, a voice rang out. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Jake froze. For a moment, he was unsure of what to expect. Someone had seen him. Maybe they were going to yell at him. Maybe they'd even call the police. He didn't care. He was used to people trying to stop him, but he always got away. It was part of the fun. He turned around to face the voice. Standing there in front of him was a man. He was tall, wearing sunglasses and a black t-shirt. His expression was calm, but there was an undeniable intensity in his posture. Jake couldn't help but feel a slight tension in the air. The man's presence seemed to fill the space, and for a moment Jake didn't feel as cocky as he usually did. "What did you just do?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. Jake rolled his eyes, a smile creeping onto his lips. "It's just a dog. Relax. I was only playing around." The man didn't flinch. He stood there, his gaze never leaving Jake's face. The crowd around them had started to notice the interaction, and some people were starting to gather. Jake could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just any random person confronting him now. There was something different about this guy. His confidence wavered slightly, but he wouldn't back down. The man took a slow step closer. "You think it's funny to hurt something weaker than you?" he asked, his voice even quieter now. Jake scoffed, glancing around at the people who were now watching. "Who cares?" he said with a shrug. "It's just a dog, man. No harm done." The man didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just stared at Jake, and that stare felt different. It wasn't just the anger or disappointment Jake had seen in others before. There was something more behind those eyes. And then the man spoke again, his voice lowering, as if he were speaking to someone who should already know better. "You should be careful with that kind of attitude." Jake, though still irritated, tried to laugh it off. Yeah, whatever," he muttered. "Go on, get out of here, nothing to see." But as he turned to leave, something unexpected happened. The man, still silent, pulled off his sunglasses, revealing a set of sharp, piercing eyes. There was no mistaking it now. The crowd started to murmur, and some even gasped. The man wasn't just some random person. The crowd's whispers grew louder. One person muttered, "Is that Vin Diesel?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. He turned, slowly, his cocky smile fading into confusion. He didn't know why this man seemed so familiar, but now that people were mentioning the name Vin Diesel, something clicked in his mind. Jake wasn't sure how to react. The smirk on his face began to fade as he started to realize that this wasn't a situation he could easily brush off. This was Vin Diesel, someone who wasn't easily intimidated, someone who had the presence to make Jake question his own actions. For a moment, Jake stood frozen, unable to move. The crowd was still talking, some of them looking at Jake, waiting to see how he would respond. But Jake was too distracted by the realization of who he was facing. As the realization sank in, the crowd became eerily quiet. The man who had been watching him wasn't just anyone. He was Vin Diesel. And now Jake was the one being watched. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Jake could feel the eyes of the entire crowd on him. The realization that he had just kicked a dog in front of Vin Diesel was starting to hit him like a cold wave. His usual confidence, that cocky smirk that never seemed to leave his face, was slipping away, replaced with uncertainty. Vin Diesel, standing a few feet away, didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on Jake, unwavering. It was like he was waiting for Jake to do something, anything, to prove he wasn't the type of man who would harm an innocent animal for a laugh. The people around them were silent, watching the standoff, unsure of what would happen next. Jake swallowed hard. The laughter and mockery that had filled the air earlier now seemed distant, almost non-existent. His usual bravado felt weak in front of someone like Vin Diesel. He had been used to getting away with things, being the loud, tough guy who could laugh off anything. But here, now, facing Diesel, it felt different. For a moment, Jake just stood there, not sure what to say. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as they waited for him to react. His eyes darted between the dog, now cowering behind its owner, and Vin Diesel, whose eyes were still locked on him, waiting for an answer. Jake cleared his throat, trying to regain some of his swagger. "Look, man," he said, his voice shaky at first. "It was just a joke. I didn't mean any harm." He waved his hand dismissively, as if trying to downplay the whole situation. But Diesel didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his presence more intimidating now than ever. "Jokes don't hurt, huh?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made Jake feel smaller than ever before. "What do you think that dog felt when you kicked it? You think it's funny to hurt something weaker than you just because you can?" Jake didn't have an answer. His stomach churned, and for the first time he regretted the prank. But his pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. "I wasn't trying to hurt it," Jake muttered. "I just thought it would be funny." "Vinny." Diesel's eyes narrowed. "Funny." He shook his head slowly, the disappointment clear on his face. "You think kicking a dog is funny?" Jake's lips pressed into a thin line. He was stuck. He didn't know how to make it right. The crowd was still watching, some whispering among themselves, others staring at him with judgment. He could feel the weight of their eyes, but most of all, he could feel the weight of Vin Diesel's gaze, like it was cutting through him. The owner of the dog, still holding her phone, stepped forward cautiously. Her voice was trembling with anger. "What kind of person kicks a defenseless dog?" she asked, her eyes locked on Jake. "That's not a joke, that's cruelty." Jake didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had no excuse, no defense. The crowd's whispers grew louder, and he could feel their judgment like a physical weight pressing down on him. Vin Diesel took another step closer, his voice calm but forceful. "I don't think you understand the gravity of what you did, but I'm not going to let you get away with it." He turned to the dog's owner. "Don't worry. I've got this." The woman hesitated for a moment, looking from Vin Diesel to Jake, her expression uncertain. "Are you going to do something about this?" Vin Diesel nodded. "You don't have to worry about it. He'll learn his lesson." Jake felt a cold sweat begin to form on the back of his neck. He had no idea what Vin Diesel was going to do, but he could sense the power behind his words. Vin Diesel wasn't someone you messed with, not just because of who he was, but because of the presence he commanded. Jake took a step back, suddenly feeling very small. He wasn't used to feeling scared or unsure of himself, but in this moment he did. What was about to happen? Would Vin Diesel call the police? Would the crowd turn against him completely? He could already feel the tension rising, the eyes of everyone around him weighing heavily on his shoulders. The crowd stood still, the silence almost deafening. Jake could hear his heart thudding in his chest louder than ever before. He had been a bully, a man who prided himself on pushing people's buttons and never backing down. But now, standing in front of Vin Diesel and surrounded by people who expected him to be better, something shifted inside him. Vin Diesel, still calm but firm, addressed the crowd. "This isn't about being tough or acting like a big shot. It's about respect. Respect for everyone, including animals." Jake's eyes flicked around the park. Some people were nodding, others looking at him with disgust. The feeling of humiliation was starting to take root. But it wasn't just from the crowd. It was from the fact that deep down, Jake knew he had crossed a line. He had hurt an innocent animal for his own amusement, and now he was paying the price. Vin Diesel turned back to the dog's owner, who was still clutching her phone in disbelief. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice softened in contrast to his earlier firmness. "Is your dog all right?" The woman nodded, though her face still carried a mixture of anger and confusion. "He's fine," she said, looking down at the dog, who had stopped shaking and was now standing by her side, his tail wagging cautiously. "But I still can't believe this happened." Jake felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He looked at the dog and its owner, then at Vin Diesel, whose unwavering gaze seemed to see straight through him. For the first time, Jake realized how much damage his actions had caused, not just to the dog, but to the people around him. The fear and anger in the woman's eyes, the disappointment in the eyes of the crowd, and the calm judgment in Vin Diesel's eyes were too much to ignore. "I'm sorry," Jake muttered, his voice barely audible. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth, but they were the truth. "I didn't mean to. I thought it was funny." Vin Diesel shook his head slowly, his expression softening. "It's not about what you thought. It's about what you did. And you can't just go around hurting others because you think it's funny. People and animals deserve better." Jake stood there, speechless. He had no comeback, no witty remark, no way to explain his actions. It was just the harsh reality hitting him all at once. The crowd, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, began to murmur. The tension that had been hanging in the air began to dissolve, replaced by a collective sense of relief. People had seen the apology, the sincerity in Jake's eyes. Some nodded in approval, while others still looked at him with skepticism, unsure if this was a genuine change or just a moment of weakness. Vin Diesel stepped forward, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You've got a chance to make this right," he said, his voice steady and kind. "And if you want to, you can start by making sure this doesn't happen again. Learn from it. Grow from it." Jake blinked, the weight of Diesel's words sinking in. He had spent his whole life building a tough exterior, pretending to be someone he wasn't. And now, standing here in front of Vin Diesel, he realized how much of that was a lie. He had been too afraid to show any weakness, too afraid to admit when he was wrong. But now, with everyone watching, he couldn't hide anymore. "I will," Jake said, his voice firm this time, though there was still a hint of uncertainty. "I'll make it right. I swear." Vin Diesel nodded, then turned his attention to the dog, who had now cautiously approached him. Diesel knelt down, holding out his hand. The dog sniffed him for a moment before licking his fingers, and the crowd collectively sighed in relief. Jake watched the interaction, his heart starting to change. Maybe he couldn't undo what he had done, but maybe, just maybe, he could learn from this moment and be a better person moving forward. The next few days felt like a blur for Jake. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in him. He spent hours replaying the scene in his mind, trying to make sense of the unexpected turn of events. It wasn't just Vin Diesel's presence that had changed things. It was the realization that for the first time in his life, he had been called out. Not just for a prank or a joke, but for something that truly mattered. As he sat in his apartment, his eyes wandered to the leather jacket hanging in his closet. It was the same jacket he had worn that day, the same one that had made him feel invincible. But now, it didn't seem as important. His eyes then fell to his phone, where he had saved a news article from the local media, covering the incident at the park. The headline read, Vin Diesel confronts reckless biker over dog abuse in City Park. Jake had never cared about public opinion. He had never been one to care what people thought of him. But the words in that article stung. They weren't about the tough biker persona he had worked so hard to cultivate. Instead, they were about his actions, the cruelty he had shown to an innocent dog. The very thing he had brushed off as a joke was now all anyone would remember about him. But there was one line in the article that stood out to him. Vin Diesel's unexpected intervention sparked a turning point for the biker. Jake had never thought of himself as the type of person who could change. He was the guy who made people laugh, who enjoyed shocking others with his bold antics. But now he found himself wondering if he could really change. Could he be someone who would make things right, not just for the dog but for himself? The next day, Jake found himself at the same park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the path where the incident had taken place. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the bench where he had kicked the dog, his feet feeling heavy with every step. He had come here with a purpose. He needed to make it right, even if it meant facing his own guilt. As he sat on the bench, he couldn't help but notice the empty spot where the dog had been that day. The spot that was now just a reminder of his reckless actions. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to the woman who owned the dog, hoping she would understand that he wasn't the same person he had been in that moment. He wrote, "I'm really sorry for what happened the other day. I didn't think about how much my actions hurt you and your dog. I want to make it right. If you're open to it, I'd like to apologize in person and help out however I can. I've changed and I'm ready to show you that." He stared at the message for a moment, unsure if she would respond. The truth was, he wasn't sure if she would ever forgive him, but he couldn't keep hiding from his mistakes. He had to take responsibility for what he'd done. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was a reply. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm glad to hear that you want to make it right. I'll be at the park tomorrow with Max if you want to come by and apologize." Jake's heart sank, and a wave of nervousness washed over him. The woman, whose name he had learned was Sarah, had agreed to meet. But now he was filled with doubt. Would she accept his apology? Would she believe that he had changed? Or was this just another attempt to cover up his mistake? Jake stood up, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. He was going to show up. He was going to do whatever it took to prove to Sarah, to the dog, and to himself that he wasn't just the reckless biker who kicked a dog for fun. He was going to be better. Jake arrived at the park earlier than expected, his nerves eating at him as he walked the familiar path to the bench. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over everything, but the warm hues did little to settle his nerves. His heart was racing and every step felt heavier than the last. He tried to focus, tried to remind himself that this was his chance to make things right. But doubt crept into his mind. What if Sarah didn't believe him? What if his apology wasn't enough? He reached the spot where he had kicked the dog, Max, just a few days ago. The bench was empty, and for a moment Jake wondered if Sarah had decided not to show up. But just as he was about to turn around, he saw her, walking towards him with Max by her side. Max was the same small dog Jake had kicked, but now he looked calm, walking happily beside Sarah. The sight of the dog made Jake's stomach twist. He had hurt this creature, and now he was going to face the consequences of that action. Sarah stopped a few feet away from Jake. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes serious but not cold. Max sat down beside her, looking up at Jake with a calm expression. Jake opened his mouth to speak but found his voice stuck. This wasn't going to be easy, but he knew it was necessary. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "Sarah, I owe you both an apology. I acted like an idiot the other day and I hurt you and your dog. That wasn't right, and I know it. I want to make up for what I did, even if it's not easy." Sarah looked at him for a moment, her gaze unflinching. Jake could see the doubt in her eyes. He knew she had every right to be angry. But when she spoke, her voice was calm, though there was still a hardness to it. "I don't know if I can just forget what you did," she said slowly. but I appreciate that you're willing to admit it. Not everyone would. Jake nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and shame. He had expected her to be angry, and she was, rightfully so. But there was a part of him that felt grateful she was even willing to listen. I was wrong, Jake continued, and I know there's no excuse for what I did, but I want you to know that I've changed. I've been thinking about it ever since that day, and I swear I'll never do anything like that again. Sarah's eyes softened slightly, but she still didn't smile. Instead, she looked down at Max and then back up at Jake. I don't know if it'll make everything better, she said, but I can see you mean it. Just promise me one thing. Don't hurt anyone or anything again. Ever. Jake's heart lifted at her words, though he knew he still had a long way to go. He would have to prove that he had changed, and he would do it every day for the rest of his life. But for now, this was a start. I promise, he said, his voice steady. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then finally she nodded. Okay, she said softly. We'll see. As Sarah and Max turned to leave, Jake watched them walk away. His heart was still heavy, but now there was hope. Maybe he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but he could try to be a better person from here on out. As the sun dipped lower, on the horizon, Jake took a deep breath and smiled to himself. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Days had passed since Jake's encounter with Sarah and Max. The park was quieter now, and Jake had kept to himself. He hadn't seen Sarah again, nor had he encountered Max. But deep inside, Jake knew this wasn't over. A part of him feared that the forgiveness he hoped for might be nothing more than a fleeting moment, just a small gesture that wouldn't change anything in the long run. But Jake had made a promise, and he wasn't about to back down from it. One afternoon, while Jake was riding his motorcycle along a quieter part of the city, he spotted Sarah and Max walking down the street. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to see them so soon, and he wasn't sure what to do. The old feeling of anxiety gripped him, but this time, he wasn't running away. He wasn't the man who had kicked the dog. He wasn't that person anymore. With a steady hand, Jake slowed his bike to a stop right in front of Sarah and Max. She looked up in surprise, her eyes searching his face for any sign of mischief or regret, but all she saw was sincerity. Sarah, Jake said, stepping off his bike. I just wanted to ask if we could talk for a minute. She stood there, arms crossed, Max sitting calmly beside her. For a moment, Jake feared she might turn away, but instead she nodded. All right, she said, her tone neutral. What's on your mind? Jake took a deep breath. He knew he had to be honest with her. No more jokes, no more trying to hide behind his tough biker persona. He needed to show her that he had changed, that the man she had seen in the park wasn't the real Jake. I've been thinking about you and Max a lot since the last time we spoke, Jake began. I know I hurt you both, and I'm sorry, but I want to do more than just say I'm sorry. I want to make up for what I did. Sarah's expression softened, but she still didn't smile. She listened intently, waiting for him to continue. I've been volunteering at a local animal shelter, Jake continued. I'm not saying that'll make up for everything I did, but I want to help. I want to prove that I'm not the guy who kicks dogs for fun. I want to be the guy who protects them, the guy who can stand up for what's right. There was silence for a long moment. Sarah didn't respond immediately, and Jake wondered if he had said the wrong thing. But then she looked down at Max, then back at Jake, her eyes searching his face. You're serious about this, aren't you? She asked quietly. Jake nodded. Yeah. I'm done being the guy who hurts others for laughs. I don't want to be him anymore. Sarah didn't say anything at first, but she stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. All right, she said finally. I'll give you a chance, but you've got a lot to prove. Jake felt a weight lift off his chest. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a step in the right direction. He didn't expect things to be fixed overnight, but this was a beginning. He was willing to do whatever it took. Thank you, he said, his voice full of gratitude. I won't let you down. As Sarah turned to walk away, Jake stayed behind for a moment, watching her and Max. The feeling of guilt that had lingered for so long was finally starting to fade, replaced with something new. A sense of purpose. A desire to prove that people could change, no matter how bad their past had been. And as Jake started his bike again, ready to return to the shelter, he realized something important. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't saying, "You're sorry," it's proving it through actions. And this was just the beginning of his journey.